Hello, everyone. We have an exciting podcast to do today. Don't forget that if you are watching this and you don't have a glass of wine in your hand, what's wrong with you? You need to go to AllisonWinePromo.com, which is one of my sponsors that keeps interviews like this coming in to answer all of your questions about free speech around the world. AllisonWinePromo.com, you get 50% off of my favorite Malbecs from Argentina and 50% off shipping. These are wines you cannot get at the grocery store. They're often limited edition wines. They're also extremist altitude wines. That's what I call them, extremist altitude, because if you're not an extremist nowadays, or you haven't been called an extremist, then you're probably not doing anything. You're probably just sitting in your mom's basement. Okay, it's time to get on with your life and do something that's worth people noticing. So go to get your extremist altitude wine. One of these is almost from 9,000 feet. Another one is hand-picked grapes. Another one, natural fermentation. So they're all very good. I drink them personally. The one on the left, the Rogue Malbec, I say all the time, is one of my favorite wines ever. So I'm not joking when I say that I love these wines and they keep me in business. And so if you're already a wine drinker, go to AllisonWinePromo.com and get some extremist altitude wine. Remember also you can get TwinEngineCoffee.com/Allison, which is USDA certified organic roast. There's light roast, there's dark roast, there's also a Katura tea. If you like tea, it's the tea that you brew from the fruit around the coffee bean. That's a very small picture, but here, we'll make it a little bit bigger. It tastes a lot like black tea. It's very good. Low caffeine, high antioxidants. I like to cold brew mine for 24 hours, but you can hot brew it just like your average tea. So again, my sponsors are basically half my income. So if you want to keep me in business and you're already drinking coffee, wine, or tea, go check out TwinEngineCoffee.com/Allison or AllisonWinePromo.com and support my work. And let's bring in one of the guests that you're helping to support by going to my sponsors. We got Bryn Harris here, all the way from across the pond. From where are you in England?
Hi, Alison. I'm in Oxford, in
Oxford.
England, but
So he's very smart if he comes from Oxford. We all know that.
not sure about that. I forgot my wine, by the way. You should have told me. I'd have happily had a glass of wine here, but
Oh, well, we can wait
I
if you
forgot.
would like to go go
Okay,
get your wine.
it's
Yeah,
Monday.
because it's 5 o'clock somewhere, as they say, and right now it is 5 o'clock where you are.
It is indeed. It's 5 o'clock on a Monday, so I might get in a bit of trouble. I might have to do it sort of discreetly so my wife doesn't see. But yeah,
Okay, well, thank you for that. This way, at least people can't say he just said that because he was drunk, right? When we're talking talking about this story, because it will sound a little bit like you're drunk when we're talking about this, because it's such an it's such a weird, interesting, fascinating case. It just is, especially if you think about where we've been over the last, I don't know, 6 to 10 years, and would anything like this have ever even caused a stir 10 years ago? But this is the story. Hamline University lecturer, who I believe was an art history professor. So the person is teaching art history, fired over a medieval painting of the Prophet Muhammad. And Reason believes this is it. This was the painting at the center of the controversy. This art history professor showed this to students, and apparently the students who were Muslim, or some students who weren't, were upset because, if I understand correctly, you're not supposed to show an image of Muhammad, and they called it Islamophobic. So Reason links a couple of the articles written by what I believe this is the student newspaper. And here they just basically generally call it a Islamophobic incident. Okay, they're calling it an Islamophobic incident that happened a few weeks ago. The dean of students' office informed Hamline about it via email, um, and then they do a follow up because there was so much pushback, I guess, about it, and they tried to sort of show you other sides to it, but one of the fascinating parts of this article is that one of the senior students, D'Angela Huddleston, a Hamline senior and MSA member, also shared her thoughts with the Oracle, saying, Hamline teaches us it doesn't matter the intent. The impact is what matters. So it doesn't matter if the teacher's intent was to teach art history class by showing you a picture of art history. It only matters if a bunch of students got mad at you. That's where we're at. So, Bryn, you're with the Free Speech Union. Break it down for us. What's going on here?
well, I mean, something's gone pretty badly awry here by the looks of it. As you know, Alison, UK universities are seeing lots of the same stuff as is happening in the US with this sort of culture of closed-mindedness and intolerance. In fact, we had a similar case regarding a lecturer who had displayed a similar picture from Islamic art history. But even in this context, whereby we're seeing the same craziness across the English-speaking world, this is a pretty extreme case. It really is, because the academic, Dr. Lopez Prata, or Prater, let's call it Prater. She really did everything right, in terms of how to properly exercise your academic freedom. She was talking about something which was well within her area of expertise. She's an art historian. She was showing this old example of Islamic art, and during a stage at which Muhammad could be portrayed. Now it's frowned upon, but obviously religions change. So really exercising her expertise, and also she warned the class, and I think that's the absolute sort of winner for her. She gave a trigger warning, and I think really, I mean, obviously, I'm not especially keen on trigger warnings, and I can't imagine you are. But if we're going to have them, if we have to have them, then they should do something. They should work. And in this case, she gave a warning, and it wasn't enough, and she was dismissed. Now, I mean, one thing to note, and this is a similarity, a regrettable similarity, I think, between the US and the UK, is that Dr. Lopez Prater was a junior academic. She was an adjunct professor, and that's something that we see quite a lot with the Free Speech Union. I'm sure FIRE see it, that a lot of the targeting is of junior academics, people who are precariously employed. Maybe they're on, sort of casual contracts, and they're easy to pick on. It's a lot easier to pick on them than it is, some grand tenured academic. So it really sucks. I mean, there's an aspect of bullying, of picking on the small people, but certainly some very interesting points here, because I understand Hamline is a private university, and that's something that's quite it's quite different with the between the US and the UK, because obviously you guys have got this sort of Rolls-Royce protection in your law in the form of the First Amendment, and something that we don't really have any equivalent of it. The First Amendment is a real sort of US innovation, if you like. But at the same time, so while you've got that really quite muscular protection for freedom of speech, obviously it doesn't apply in private universities. Whereas in the UK, pretty much all universities, or pretty much all, I'd say, are state universities, so that public or state protection of freedom of speech applies in pretty much all universities. So it's it's really hard on Dr. Lopez Prata that she's in this jurisdiction which has got this real tough muscular free speech protection, but because she was at a private university, it doesn't seem, as I understand it anyway, she won't get the benefit of the First Amendment protection. So we don't act in the United States, so we're a UK only organization, and in fact many UK organizations and insurers don't allow them to work in America, because the damages in your court cases are insane, very, very high levels of damages, which our insurers don't like. But anyway, sorry, despite that, be very interested to see what Dr. Lopez Prata does. Interesting to see what her legal options are. What's open to her, whether she can sue in contract, whether there's any way she can get the First Amendment to apply. Because, I think anyone who's interested in academic freedom, free speech, is really going to be all over this. this is such a flagrant violation of academic freedom. And I should say, academic freedom, I mean, that's an idea sort of early last century, develops in the United States. Comes from the academy, but absolutely forcefully voiced in the United States. And yeah, I think there'll be a lot of people interested in this. So it'll be interesting to see what she can do to stick up for herself.
All right, let's go. Before we get any further, let's talk about the Free Speech Union and what you all do. Why did you form, and give me some examples of cases that you have taken on.
Yeah, sure. So we set up, goodness me, nearly 3 years ago now, in February 2020, and we were responding to sort of growing culture of illiberal intolerance, really, whereby people were losing their jobs, they're losing pretty serious positions, or they were being sort of booted out of university, or having lectures cancelled, and it was very clear that there was something going on. Something was rotten in the state of England and the rest of the UK, and there were there were gaps, because one thing that we're seeing quite a lot is, if you go back, let's say sort of 10 or 15 years or more, free speech was mainly a topic that concerned, the press. I mean, if you're in free speech, you're usually defending press freedom, or, doing a lot of overseas work. And then since then, regulation of what people say has become part of the employment relationship. Sort of HR departments, personnel departments, they've started taking a real interest in what people say, what their employees say, including what they say outside of work in the employment context. So we were seeing, a lot of cases with people losing their livelihoods because they'd said the wrong thing. And also a lot of the time, pretty ordinary people, not sort of whatever, like Woodward and Bernstein types, just ordinary guys and women who'd said something that an HR department didn't like, and that was it. So there was clearly a growing problem, and I think the unions, trade unions, not so keen on it. I mean, as I'm sure is the case in the United States, trade unions have their own political positions, and there was a perception that sort of free speech, and still is a perception that free speech is quite a right-wing concern. So, the unions weren't stepping in to help these people who were on the wrong end of this sort of rather toxic culture. And equally as well, there's in the UK we have a Human Rights Act, but and freedom of speech is part of that. It's part of our human rights protections, but equally, you've got a human rights body and movement, and human rights lawyers who, perhaps over time seem to have fallen out of love with free speech. They're all in favor of human rights, but just not too keen on free speech. So there was a lot happening. People being muzzled quite a lot, and there was a need for someone to step in to help those people. So Toby Young, our founder, he's the guy in the center of the picture there. He founded the Free Speech Union. It's a membership organization. Our members pay an annual subscription to join. And we help them as much as we can. So we have a legal team, and I head the legal team with my colleague, Caroline. And we've got a sort of panel of about 40 lawyers who we call on to see if they can help our members when they're in trouble. So that's one of the main things that we do. It's an area where we make the most sort of difference, if you like. but we also, we also do policy work, so working on legislation, assisting lawmakers with amendments to bills as they proceed through Parliament, to try and make them more sort of pro-free speech. So those are that's sort of the main sort of part of what we do. And we have, we've had some pretty good results. And I mean, I think the tide may be turning very slowly, perhaps, but I think we are getting there. So we've had certainly some good wins in the courts. We had a very, one of our major cases recently was, it's very much like a lockdown story. It was an employee who was at home, and he was a train manager, and he had volunteered to attend white privilege training. There we are.
This guy. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was pulling up that PayPal picture because I want you to talk about that too, because not everything you all do is in court. It's just harnessing the collective number of people who can, I guess, give back a little bit of what some of these, the cancel culture has been giving out, which is using your own voices to tell companies that it's unacceptable what their policies are. And PayPal was coming after folks and canceling them. Like we all know, PayPal's been going after people that are violating their whatever acceptable use policy, which could mean any number of things. So I want you to talk about PayPal in a second, but yeah, since you're on this, Simon Isherwood,
yeah, sure. Simon Isherwood, yeah, that's right. So Simon was a train manager, and during the lockdown, working at home, he attended online white privilege training. He volunteered to do it. I think he regretted it later somewhat. And he was on, I think, Teams. And at the end of the session, unfortunately, Simon didn't realize that he hadn't logged off from the session, and he discussed with his wife what he thought of the training, and he used what English lawyers like to term industrial language, where he expressed, he said that he couldn't be asked, which means he couldn't be bothered. And then he said, do you think they have black privilege in Ghana? And that was a question that he'd been intending to ask. He sort of said, well, we talk about white privilege, but, would you have black privilege in a black majority country? Fair question. But unfortunately, while he was saying this, Simon hadn't realized his microphone was still on, and that he was broadcasting to all of his colleagues, some of whom took offense, and then it was escalated to HR. And Simon was dismissed because he'd caused offense. Now we were able to help Simon. We got him a very good civil liberties trial lawyer, and he won in the tribunal on liability. And then subsequently, there were amicable discussions about settlement. But Simon was really, he was really sort of shat upon from a great height. This is just an ordinary working guy trying to do the right thing. He volunteered to attend this training. He didn't have to. But he had some questions about it. He was reflective. He thought, well, I'm not so sure about this. But he said the wrong thing that the like-minded, sort of right-minded tyrants decided was unacceptable. And so they felt entitled to destroy his livelihood, to destroy a career of 30, 40 years, and to, really, essentially, I think what they were trying to do is to put Simon on the scrap heap. But he wouldn't take it. He fought, and he said, well, I'm not going to take that. I'm going to fight. And he did, and he won. But just going back, Alison, to what you were saying, there is a sort of communitarian sort of aspect to this, because our courts are like yours. They work on precedent, and so one victory for one person like Simon, even when it's not strictly a binding precedent, it helps everyone else. It helps the next guy or woman who goes to court with a similar case, because you can point to Simon winning, and so there's this kind of thing where people help us to bring these cases. Very often they help fund them, and then if there's also this payback. Simon won a victory not just for himself, but for everyone else, who's in their situation. So it's good. We try to help people, people whose lives have often been really pretty badly affected by this. But we're not just helping the individual. You know what I mean? It's also trying to create a new judicial culture, trying to get judges interested in freedom of speech, and sending a message out to employers, to HR departments, that it's not the Wild West out there. You can't just treat your employees any old way you like. You got to respect them. You got to be fair to them. And sometimes, like Simon, if they say something in the privacy of their own home that you don't like, well, that's none of your damn business. And it's certainly no reason to try and destroy their livelihood.
Okay, Bryn, I want to give you a heads up real fast. We thought we had fixed the internet problem, but something seems to be, the bug is happening again. So if I freeze, just talk about another case, okay? Just go talk about another thing that Free Speech Union does. I don't know what's going on. My internet provider, they were pinging our radio off of the wrong internet receiver, we found out, and they said they fixed it, but now all of a sudden it knocked me out once already. But you were talking, so you didn't notice probably. So if I freeze, just take over the show, okay? Hey, Ali Jaguar on Locals, can you hear me okay? Can you hear me, Bryn?
Yeah, yes. Sure.
Okay, good. Just making sure. Ali Jaguar asks, why are the Free Speech Union members involved in COVID assembly? I'm not sure I understand that. What is COVID assembly? Do you understand that?
I'm afraid I don't. That's a very good question.
Okay.
I mean, certainly. To answer, Ali, I'm afraid I don't know if we are, but that could be entirely my ignorance. But there certainly is. Just to give a broader answer, if I can, there certainly is some overlap, between those concerned about the response to COVID and those concerned with freedom of speech. Broadly, obviously, lockdown was a policy that engaged our civil liberties and sort of freedom of speech. I mean, there's that sort of link. But also, as well, we did see quite a lot of policing of speech during the time of lockdown, especially regarding the efficacy of lockdowns, the effectiveness of masks, and then also, of course, subsequently the effectiveness of vaccines. So COVID inevitably became an issue of freedom of speech, and it became it's a very difficult one, and I think it did engage some very difficult issues, and certainly one could say in a public health situation that can be a justifying ground for restricting sort of whatever loose speech, if you want, and I think that's certainly in principle that can be justified, but at the same time we were discussing not just a public health issue, but the absolute pressing issue of the day, something that was affecting pretty much everyone's liberty and their ability to get out of their home. And we were discussing things that a lot of the time were uncertain. We didn't have ideas. We didn't have definite ideas. We didn't have definite certainties or conclusions. We didn't know if masks worked. We didn't know if lockdowns worked. And the idea that we wouldn't be able to talk freely, to think our way through these difficult issues, I think was for the birds. So, even though there can be public health justifications for restricting free speech, I think most of the occasions where people were muzzled, really didn't sort of meet the threshold to apply that justification. So, yeah, we did help people with COVID, often like medical professionals who dared to say the wrong thing about COVID. And then the regulatory bodies came down on them like a ton of bricks.
Okay, let me take a couple questions from locals. Don't forget, if you're not subscribed over on locals, become a supporter. If you got $5 a month, you can put in questions ahead of time for interviews. You also get exclusive content. My buddy Bill Doris, who also used to be in TV news, we do a weekly show just for supporters. So if you've never heard of it, it's because you're not a supporter. And it's on Wednesdays we upload it, and we're going to start doing live soon. So that's another reason. And also, my dad is a surgeon, and we do a weekly Dr. Dad on health and clean living topics. Once a week too. That's for everybody over on locals only right now. But so sign up on locals, even if you want to just do the free version, you'll get a lot of extra content. But if you want the Tittle Tattle exclusive, as well as, which is the news show that Bill and I do, as well as the ability to submit for interviews, questions you have or comments, then go join for $5 a month. It's one of the best ways to support my work as well. Okay, the first question we have. Well, let's go to the bottom. Let's start with the people who got them in first. What institution has been the hardest to deal with in your efforts?
That's a very good question. Excuse me. I mean so we do a lot with universities, and we also deal a lot with just with employers and the private and public sector. I think the civil service is probably one of our toughest targets. So civil, I mean, like employees of the state, and there's a particular culture, and even people who would call themselves fairly woke, I think a lot of them would agree that certain sectors like the public sector, the civil service, and charities, the people who think of themselves as the nicest guys often tend to be the nastiest. Just I think just because they sort of think, oh well, look, we're heroes, we're saving lives, and so they just think whatever they do, they they're always the good guys. So I mean, difficult to engage with, partly because they often, on some occasions, have really quite flagrantly breached people's free speech rights and the rights of our members. And then at the same time, the civil service can have a real sort of inflexibility in the way that it works. Perhaps it's not always as sort of pragmatic as those in the commercial sector can be. And so when it comes down to, as it does, it's not just a fight, but it's got to be a discussion and a negotiation. It's not always easy to get to grips with them. So I'd say civil service, also equally in the public sector, universities can be. I mean, universities are pretty much ground zero for a lot of what we're seeing. So it's like being at the core of the reactor. It's where these ideas are the most red hot.
Let's see. Let me get you to this next question. No specific questions, but just would like detailed background on funding sources, success rated, level of resistance within justice system, i.e. courts, prosecution, law enforcement, any illegal surveillance by agencies, what cases we may have heard of. Okay, so a bunch there. We've kind of talked about some cases. Let's start with where does the money for the Free Speech Union come from?
So we're funded by our members. So we ask members to pay an annual subscription. You can join as overseas members as well. It's £2.50 a month, which is probably around about $2.50 a month at the moment, given the exchange rate. You become a member, and that entitles you to help from us, and also attendance at events and things like that. So the main bulk of our funding comes from our members, and it's I should say we're not a law firm for a start. We're also not an insurance outfit, but I mean it does sort of work a little bit like insurance, almost a little metaphorically, in the sense that you pay in for your membership, You may never need it, you know what I mean? You may never be sacked, you may never be in trouble. But, well, first of all, it's there if you need it. And also, others who are affected will benefit from, you know, the fees that you've paid. So it's kind of pooling risk. So that's the main thing. But then also, we do a fair bit of crowdfunding. So if somebody's, one of our members is going to court, you know, they're going to need a lawyer to whatever, 4 or 5 days or however long, then very often we'd, you know, set up a crowdfunding page. And you know, we're finding that people are pretty generous. They're willing to sort of, you know, put their hands in their pocket and help people in need. So
What
yeah.
about the question about courts? Have you had any issues? Like in the United States, it's just more and more, I think, kind of becoming obvious that, you know, judges are people too, and they tend to be swayed by public opinion, and whether you're going to get a fair shake at your First Amendment case is really kind of dependent upon where you are and the political climate in that particular place, not necessarily based on the law. What's up with that with you all? Have you found that to be the case where you are?
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, and I certainly recognize what you're saying. I mean, I'll start generally first. I mean, you know, certainly at the lower level of courts, like in sort of magistrates' courts, I imagine that's what you call them. Yeah, it's the sort of courts where you go to for like speeding offences and that sort of stuff, the real low level criminal courts. And also in the employment tribunals, which are again are quite informal, quite low cost. You know, those are the sorts of courts all the time where we'll do our work. But it's probably at that lower level that you might see some errors made by judges, which, you know, perhaps reflect, you know, the judge's own cultural sort of dispositions. Especially, yeah, and I think part of the reason is sometimes they're younger judges. They're not, you know, they're at the start of their career. Possibly they're a bit more, dare I say it, possibly a bit more woke than some of the older senior judges. And so sometimes what you see is, you know, you do see some, you know, slightly batty judgments in the junior courts. But equally, you know, the system works. We've just, as you guys have as well, you have the oversight of the senior courts. You can appeal, you can get judicial review. And then when those senior courts, the High Court in London, for instance, or the Employment Appeal Tribunal, appeal courts, etc., you know, then they step in and you know, that can restrain some of those excesses. And so when you look at some of the senior judges, there's still great hope. I think some of them, I think maybe all of them, most of them, you know, I think they still have in their heart the fundamentally liberal philosophy. When I say liberal, I mean in the John Stuart Mill's sense of the word, not the American sense of liberal. You know, they still have this the liberal philosophy of the common law, the belief in protection of the individual, the protection of the liberties of the individual. I think that's still there at the heart of English law and the heart of US law as well. But it's certainly true that the legal profession is becoming quite, you know, in some ways quite activist and politicized. And in terms of what we've seen, you know, certainly we do a lot of work in the employment tribunals, and you know, that's you know, there can be a little bit of politicking in that. And well, I think we probably tend to be a little bit pessimistic about ever getting an employment judge to talk about free speech, but it can be done. We have done it, and we've, again, in the Isherwood case, you know, we've got a good finding on free speech. So I think, you know, the judiciary is not in any ways the enemy, and I think there's a lot of judges out there who would be very sympathetic to what we're doing. But equally, I should say, a lot of people in the legal profession who probably despise what we do. So swings and roundabouts.
Okay, Wells Mortensen here. Would your guest attribute the firing? I guess we're going back to the original story of the
Mm.
Muhammad painting. Would your guest attribute the firing to indoctrination amongst academia and students, or to financial backing, roots of the private institution? I think that's a really good question
Mm.
for a lot of the issues that probably you all face, as well as the people I've had on this channel, because often I think people think it's just you get a lot of money from one or another special interest, and so you have to do their bidding. But in my experience, even if that's the case, I have found most of these, like say the journalists who I used to work with, or people running the corporations who are censoring, have truly they've truly bought into the idea that they're doing a public good, that
Mm.
they have the moral high ground. They're protecting you from something. They're the savior. In other words, it's the ego. It's not the money, really, and the power and control. And they don't necessarily see it that way. They see it again like as benevolence. But I found that to be far more dangerous motivator when it
Mm.
comes to authoritarianism, frankly, than the idea that I get paid. I think a lot of these people sleep very well at night thinking not that, wow, I made a lot of money today, but that I did a lot of good. And I think that twisted mentality is what drives quite a bit of this. So I'm just curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I probably would be on the same page as you, to be honest, Alison. So I mean, to address the question, I mean, uh, I don't think we've come across any cases where there's been, you know, a cancellation or a sacking has been obviously motivated by fear over funding. I mean, we certainly did have one case regarding a junior academic here at the University of Oxford, who got in trouble after he had an argument with a student who was a fellow Indian student who was a very strong Hindu nationalist. I'm sure, as you know, at the moment in India, the current government is Hindu nationalist, and and there's a lot of quite fiery politics going on in India with the BJP, and he's a member, an academic, is an opponent of Hindu nationalism, and he sort of called her out and he criticized her. A lot of people absolutely lost their minds, really just went crazy at this member of ours, and death threats, all sorts raised in the Indian Parliament. Now, in that case, it's possible. I think that the university probably was a little bit concerned at how this dispute might um, uh, affect prospective Indian students. There's a lot of people come from India to study in the UK and in places like Oxford, and so I think that's a sort of case where a university might have sort of misgivings. And the same as well goes with not something we've been involved in, but it is a problem at UK universities because of criticizing China. A lot of, or too many UK universities are getting too much funding and support from China, and can be utterly craven in their attitude to this, frankly, repressive, undemocratic nation. So I think those are the only ones that I'd really identify. But sorry, going back, Alison, to what you were saying about so what does really drive it? So yes, I mean I think partly the dangerous conviction that they are on the right side of history,
Mhm.
and that by trying to sort of destroy the livelihood of their ideological enemies, they are doing God's work. But one thing that I would say, sort of, having seen from the inside quite a lot of these disputes, a lot of the time it's sheer panic, sheer mindless, headless chicken panic, in that an employee or a student, an academic, has said something which someone has taken offense to. And in the current environment, um, that's a little bit like sort of screaming fire in a crowded building. It makes a lot of these administrators seemingly sort of lose their mind. And I think it's partly because they fear for themselves. They fear the institution might be denounced. Uh, they perhaps fear the response from some of the more activist members of the university community. Um, and it's from there that you can get snowballing. So that there's a panic reaction, and perhaps they overreact. They, perhaps suspend the student or academic, um, and then, even if it was fairly innocuous, and very often, of course, it is, there's an initial panic reaction, and it escalates, and it's very difficult then to get it back, to bring it back down to earth, and to say, hang on, step back a bit. This is insane. What this person said was innocuous. But it's difficult because by then they've got skin in the game. They've said, no, we want to hang this guy, this woman out to dry. And it's difficult to sort of talk them down from there. So I think a culture of fear, culture of denunciation, is another reason why. And a lot of what these administrators need to do is to breathe in and out deeply for 10 seconds before reacting, and just think, is are we being reasonable? Are we being fair? Because that's pretty much what the law asks you, mostly anyway.
Let me ask you this. What about the First Amendment in UK? How do you argue for free speech? What takes place of the First Amendment?
Yeah. Good question. So, it's not generally talked about. The U.S. Bill of Rights, is taken pretty much directly from the English Bill of Rights. I'm not trying to start an argument or anything here. Don't need to kick off another revolution, but it was taken from the English Bill of Rights, 1689, including the right to bear arms. Now we tend to forget about that in this country, but the right to bear arms comes directly from English law. However, even though a lot of the really key amendments there in the U.S. Bill of Rights have that provenance in English law, that real crucial innovation is the First Amendment, and for most of our history, certainly since the late 17th century, there's been a sort of culture of freedom of speech, and the courts recognized it. In that, there's never been licensing of the press, for instance, and then sort of England sort of develops a very sort of aggressive and free and competitive press. But there was never any sort of like totemic touchstone law that you could put your finger on and say, look, I know my rights, just in the way that a U.S. citizen could. And then that changed really in 2000 when the Human Rights Act was made law, and the Human Rights Act gives effect at the domestic level to the European Convention on Human Rights. And so for the first time, there is a sort of codified overarching right to free speech, or freedom of expression, as it's called, that our courts have to pay attention to, and that people can generally cite. And there's a bit of a weird sort of provenance in that the European Convention on Human Rights is in many ways largely derived from the English common law, and a lot of the drafting was by British lawyers. But the Tony Blair's government decided that the European Convention should be the sort of standard of our legal protection. I think there are very interesting questions to be raised about the actual effectiveness of those legal protections in the sense, if you ask, well, look, since the year 2000, have we become more open-minded, more free-thinking, more liberal, or perhaps has the opposite happened? So although I think there were great advantages beyond doubt to bringing in the European Convention. It's I very much think the jury's out as to whether it's had a beneficial effect. I think the answer probably that I'd still give is that certainly prior to the convention, I'd say the main difference between the US and the UK is that I think the UK did have a very strong culture of free speech, but it was mainly protected essentially as a part of our culture, and less so, not entirely, but less so through law. And so the sense was that we didn't have freedom of speech because the law guaranteed it. It was more that just our society lived, and valued freedom of speech, and it was simply a social norm which the courts recognized. And I think it's possible that in fact was a sort of a deeper and stronger protection, perhaps, than a protection in law, which is, it's there in writing, but ultimately is perhaps only words. Yes, it's a bit of a hodgepodge now. It's a mixture of common law and this international document. Certainly, I think there's a good number of people on this side of the pond who, would very much like to see something like the First Amendment, and I'd say the First Amendment is certainly stronger than anything we've got.
Okay, just a warning to everybody. My 2-year-old producer has entered the studio, so she's drawing behind me, and hopefully she will continue to do so for the remaining few minutes of the podcast. But Bryn is familiar. Okay, I'm not really sure. Well, I'll ask you these. I'm not sure you're going to have an answer to the Alex Jones question, but I'll just throw it your way. And then, so Stoop Dog says, my guess is Alex Jones is a CIA asset. Was his $1.5 billion judgment a workaround to effectively obliterate the First Amendment? From what I understand, he personally never harassed the parents of the Sandy Hook victims, so that judgment is for things other people did because of his reporting. Imagine if Orson Welles was fined for the crazy things people did when he broadcasted War of the Worlds. And then Brisbane says, do you think free speech has been so perverted by the courts by what is considered free expression of free speech? It's become something in some respects laughable. Like, how is it not free speech to lie to the FBI or Congress if you haven't been sworn in to tell the truth? Where's the First Amendment protection from the government? That's kind of I think an American, I don't know if you wanted to comment. This is a U.S. question, but I don't know. Those are the last 2 questions that were submitted yesterday, and then I got a couple live chats to throw your way. So feel free to opine on any or either or none.
I'm afraid I have no opinion on whether Alex Jones is a CIA asset. I was going to say I will take the fifth, to use the US legal vernacular. So nothing really to say on that. I can't quite remember, on what grounds Alex Jones was sued. But I mean, there is something, I think, a key difference that's quite important between the two jurisdictions. I mean, historically, as I'm sure a lot of your viewers will be aware, it's been easier to sue for defamation in England than it is in the US, and you'll often notice, often sort of Hollywood actors, they'll go sort of jurisdiction shopping, as it's known, to bring their libel claims in the courts in London. And that was because the English law on defamation favored claimants far more than U.S. law because of the protection in U.S. law of the First Amendment. Now, there's been a little bit of sort of I think paring back of the scope of defamation, and certainly one thing that has happened here is that the damages for defamation are not quite as large as they used to be, and then that's the important distinction, and it's something that often kind of blows our minds on this side of the pond, is that I think in most states in America you can sue for punitive damages, essentially punishing the wrongdoing of the tortfeasor, the person who made the wrong, and that can lead to just crazy damages in court, like with Alex Jones there, running into the billions of dollars. So it's kind of interesting. Obviously, you guys have done a far better job of keeping defamation laws in their place. But equally, I wouldn't want to be on the losing side of any U.S. judgment, to be honest, given how the damages can rack up. What was the other question? Sorry. So we had I didn't. We haven't got to the bottom of whether it's a CIA asset, I'm afraid. That's allowed.
Well, there was just, basically we've talked a little bit about the courts and free expression and whether that's just laughable at this point that there is such a thing as a First Amendment. So I think you covered Alex Jones. You're not quite sure, and then the courts thing. I think we've talked about.
Yeah, there's an interesting question as to whether when lying is protected by freedom of speech, and I think there's whole areas of of speech.
Bryn, let me cut you off real fast, because like when it comes to the lying part of this, right, or intentionally misleading, I mean, the question I think is it goes back to intent, right? Because who defines lying? Because one might define lying as, I know the other thing, and also I know for sure, like, that is the truth, and I'm telling you something differently, and so you have to judge my intent and my prior knowledge. That just seems like a very slippery slope to go down to determine whether you're going to go in from like a criminal perspective and say you're lying. Like, how do you know I'm lying? I mean, maybe I didn't know the information, or how do you get to determine the truth? See, because then they get to, the FBI says, oh, well, this is the truth. Well, why do they get to determine the truth? See, it just seems like such a rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think something isn't a lie unless there's an intention to deceive. I think there are many ways in which one can say something that's false, but nevertheless one isn't lying. And it's for that reason that we don't sort of say fictional novelists are liars. We don't read the latest Jack Reacher and sort of say lie, even though it's not true. So I think the thing that distinguishes lying from other falsehoods or untruths is that there's an intention to deceive. And I mean, certainly there are a whole number of sort of forms of speech which most of us would accept, uncontroversially aren't protected by free speech. So fraud, if you sort of lie to someone with the intent of enriching yourself or causing harm to them, and you do so dishonestly, then most of us would find it very strange if you stood up in court and said, Your Honor, I was exercising my free speech when I defrauded this old lady or whatever. It's so I think probably the same with perjury as well, perjuring yourself before certainly before a court. So I think there are some forms of sort of speech act, where it's going beyond an expression of ideas, an expression of arguments, where it's where you're doing something to someone else's detriment. And I think those are probably easier cases. But to sort of say that's not free speech. But I think the interesting thing raised by that question is the real sort of minefield or hot potato now, which is misinformation and disinformation, where and where that fits within freedom of speech. And I think that is exactly as you say. If we are to police the sort of the public arena and to sort of suppress those voices that spread misinformation, who exactly is to decide? Who are these philosopher kings who decide for us what truth is? And I think that is really quite worrying. And it's no coincidence that many of the people who are most vociferously in favor of policing misinformation also tend to be pretty illiberal, pretty intolerant.
Quick question from the live chat, actually two, and then I'm gonna let you go back to your, because dinner time almost there. Okay, someone is a little more critical of the free speech union. I'm gonna throw this question your way and let you answer them. They are controlled opposition, in my opinion. Why are they involved with the Together Declaration? Who are lawyers of light? I am confused about both of those, so I wish I could give you some more context on that, but I don't know what the Together Declaration is or lawyers of light. Does that make sense to you either?
Lawyers of light. I've got really no idea. It sounds like a group of wizards or something. I've really got no idea with that.
Toby Young. Where is Toby Young or Francis? I don't know. I can move past them, but that's what I got there. That's all I got.
Toby's my boss. Toby Young.
Okay.
The CEO of the Free Speech Union. He founded it. And he also chairs Lockdown Skeptics. Some of you may know him from that. Francis Hoare is an independent barrister who we're working with at the moment, as it happens. But so barrister, trial lawyer, Francis doesn't work for us. He doesn't work for anyone. He's an independent lawyer.
Okay. Free Speech Union seems like a sizable team with plethora of cases requiring paralegal work. Which most tedious part of daily operations could be automated, if any at all?
What a good question. Wow. I certainly think sort of gathering the initial paperwork and sticking it into some sort of order and filing, because when you first sort of have a case, you want to hoover up all the information, find out as much as you can about it, and then start developing from that a case theory and seeing how you can get some sort of legal grounds from it. What would be great is if you could just have some sort of like digital vacuum hoover that just like sucks in all the information and then produces a nice ordered bundle of documents for you. So if anyone out there is working on that, then do get in touch.
Okay, I think this is the last one here. Just going back up. Yeah, so you said you didn't know what the COVID assembly was. I don't know what that is either, so I wish I could give you some more context on that.
I feel there's a lot of questions I haven't answered. I'm very sorry about that.
It's okay. No, I appreciate your letting me throw them your way. What just happened there? Oh no, we did that one. Yes, okay, we did that. Firing attributed to financial backing or ideology, which I think you answered too. So, okay, well, I think we did everybody's questions. Thanks for submitting them. I guess any final questions, Bryn, that you want to, I don't know, that you have yourself that you're chasing right now with the Free Speech Union, or any cases you want to discuss, or any final parting words, any wine recommendations other than AllisonWinePromo.com?
Well, I'm a big fan of Malbec.
Oh, good.
So
well,
I'm very, very glad to see that.
You're at the right channel.
It's lovely. I should have mentioned PayPal, actually. We did touch upon that.
Oh, yeah. Please talk about the PayPal. Yeah.
Yeah. So just very briefly, so as I'm sure a lot of your, or some of your viewers may be aware, we and a number of other organizations have PayPal accounts cancelled. So the Free Speech Union and our CEO, Toby Young, has personal accounts cancelled. And, PayPal was very tight-lipped about it. And this meant that all of our members who use PayPal to pay their subscription fees that keep us going, were blocked. Couldn't use PayPal. And we weren't sure if we could transfer them to another platform. So, potentially there was an existential risk for us. And PayPal just wasn't clear. They mentioned their acceptable use policy, which, as you say, Alison, is as clear as mud, and it doesn't give you any sense of what you've done wrong. And it seemed very clear that there was some sort of a sort of politics of distaste going on. They just found us icky, or they don't like us, don't like what we stand for, whatever. And so it does seem that PayPal has the power and to essentially demonetize those it doesn't like. It can seriously impact their ability to raise funds. And on the face of it, it seems that that's what PayPal did. But just one thing I think that is important to bring up. This is a whole new sort of form of a sort of free speech interference, which is by extremely powerful companies, and it's something that I think Twitter was a case in point, PayPal also, and I know it's something that the US has grappled with as to how to deal with it in law. It's something that increasingly is an issue in the UK as well, because we have legislation going through protecting safety online, and safety on social media and Instagram and Twitter and all that. But it's a really difficult thing because it really it's a real wedge issue. It really sort of drives a wedge, especially between people who are ideological bedfellows, because people who support free speech will very often support free enterprise. They'll say that if you are Elon Musk and you own Twitter, it's up to you what you do with it. It's up to you what rules you have. It's up to you who you ban and who you chuck off your service. And it's not the role of the state to say how it should be run. But equally, some of these services are beginning to look something a little bit like infrastructure. It's sort of providing the basic sort of playing fields and the basic sort of systems by which we do things like talk to each other on a day-to-day basis, or just move money from one place to another. And so the counter argument is, well, these are so systemic and fundamental that they can't just be removed at a whim. So it's something that's is very difficult. I think we're going to be talking about it quite a lot, and I think especially in the States as well, it's going to be an issue. I don't know what the answer is, but I certainly think when certain services are so important, they can't abuse their power to sort of silence those they like and promote those they do. I think that's really the way we've got to look at it. That you're free to do as you like, but when you have that degree of power, it can't be abused, and that's where the law should step in.
Hey, Bryn, let me ask you one quick question back to our original topic about the Muhammad painting, because I thought this was an interesting question from Rob. I have an issue regarding the Muhammad painting. I believe Muslims in the Quran that it is a sin to display any likeness of Muhammad. In this case, I believe religious freedom trumps freedom of speech. Doing so may actually fringe upon being a hate crime, which I guess is what they were kind of arguing from the school standpoint. What do you think about that question, saying, like, is it the students' freedom of religion to say, you violated like my religious freedom to not see that image, versus the professor saying I'm teaching the class? I guess, I don't know. You were saying she gave a trigger warning, and so there was like, hey, you should just go if it's going to offend you. I think you said that, right?
Yeah, and I think
what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that that would be the answer, and also as well. So the as you say, the teacher gave every opportunity for that student not to have their religious feelings sort of hurt. But equally, even if she hadn't, and even if she just sort of sprung them upon it, sort of surprise, then it's difficult to say that would be an infringement of the student's freedom of religion. Certainly, that you might sort of say that um, the student had been harassed due to, the word that we use in the UK, and that there's like a hostile atmosphere for people of his religion. But the problem is all of this has got to be viewed in context, and the context here is, of course, a classroom, where you have the highest degree of pluralism, of open-mindedness, of exploration, um, and where it's actually very difficult to say, I have a legal entitlement to be protected from this. You don't. The law says that, in fact, they're not sort of the law in England and Europe says, there is the maximal protection of free speech in this situation, such that it's very difficult to say, you harmed my religious feelings by showing me this. But I think as well, I mean, the other thing, perhaps sort of moving less legally and talking sort of ethically, I think really by entering university, you sort of agree to an implied term that says, I open myself up to the world and what's been said about it and thought about it. And what you don't say is, I'm going to university and I only want to be shown stuff which, complies very narrowly with my particular lived experience and subjective feelings. Because it's impossible, because there are billions of forms of lived experience, and we don't do that at university. We teach objectively about the world, about knowledge, about objective reasoning. And so I think that's really what defeats the student's objection, I think, in that case.
Just personal experience, some context. I have a Master of Divinity degree from Boston University School of Theology, and I can't even say some of the stuff that we read in books for certain, like, queer theology class, for instance, which you had to take as part of the curriculum for some of the psych the psych stuff that I was training for, because I thought I wanted to be a psychologist. um it's dirty. I'll just say it's dirt. It's really dirty. Okay.
Yeah.
And about Jesus and God and Mary, and I think you could probably rightfully say that stuff, if you're going to go down that path. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I saw, but it's interesting, depending on the era and what is, I guess, what's the more sort of sensitive, protected type speech versus, or not, I guess not protected speech, the sensitive, protected ideas that you shouldn't have to hear, or you shouldn't have to listen to, versus what's okay to trash on and everybody should just deal with it. Because I think it depends on, it's just like 100 years ago, it could be a totally different group of people, which is why some of this stuff, I think you're right. I mean, contextualization and who's the biggest or the loudest, angriest group should not necessarily dictate who gets to say what, because that just changes over time. You're gonna, sometimes you'll be able to complain about this or that. But I just wanted to add that because, like, I've sat through some theology classes where you go, okay, and I mean, like, I'm like, I'm not. You can't really offend me, so. But that's pretty dirty. That's pretty dirty to say that about Jesus.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because we were talking about sort of the origins of these laws, and obviously, in the States, you have the First Amendment. But I mean, certainly, in this country, one of the major historical origins of protection of freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, is precisely the historical experience of religious conflict, of Protestants learning to live with other Protestants, and eventually learning to live with Catholics. And that is the historical origin of how we learn tolerance. And obviously, we fought a civil war in this country over it, sometime before you guys had your own civil war. And it's always been central to the ideas of freedom of speech, and I'm quite sure as well it informed the First Amendment. And so it's hugely sort of retrograde and depressing to for those lessons to be unlearned in this way, and fairly to realize that one religion can't protect its own sort of pieties and rules on a non-follower. You can't say this is sacred to me, therefore you can't do it. It's like, well, that's not quite how freedom of conscience works. There needs to be a recognition of the difference and tolerance of that. So there's a real, I think when these things concern religious conscience, it really does pinpoint how retrograde this has become, because you end up saying, guys, this is stuff we learned in the 19th century, really is time. We don't have to, reinvent the wheel.
Okay. Bryn Harris, thank you, of the Free Speech Union. I really appreciate your taking the time to come on and answer all those questions about everything from Alex Jones as a CIA to many other things. I appreciate everybody who's watching on the different platforms. Thanks again. And we'll see you next time. Bryn, thanks again.
Thanks, Alison. Good to talk to you.